For European security, one question looms large.
If a war broke out in Europe and Russia were to attack an ally, would Donald Trump really show up?
I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. Today, the new defense calculus. Also, an internet shutdown in Afghanistan. Girls lost one more form of access to the outside world.
This is one of the most disastrous updates that I've seen out of Afghanistan.
A changing ocean current could spell disaster. While researchers try to figure that out, I hop on a boat to witness the science.
This is the best part.
And this is when the ocean spills its secrets.
Yes, exactly. This is the tea from the ocean.
Plus, big Schwarzenegger love for Pope Leo.
He ordered the Vatican to put solar panels on top of the buildings.
All today on The World.
This is The World. I'm Marco Werman.
And I'm Carolyn Beeler. We are glad you are with us today.
Europe is facing a new reality when it comes to defense. A so-called drone wall protecting Europe from Russia is likely to be part of that, so say EU leaders gathering in Copenhagen today. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen did not mince words, describing the threat from Russia as she sees it.
I think we are in the most difficult and dangerous situation since the end of the Second World War.
Shashank Joshi joined us today to put Europe's reaction in perspective. He's defense editor at The Economist, based near London. He told me Ukraine was far from the only pressing issue on European leaders' agenda today.
They're also meeting after a very difficult week in which they've seen a number of different types of Russian incursions into EU airspace, not just Poland and Estonia, but more recently also suspected Russian drone incursions over Copenhagen itself, as well as a number of other places, including Sweden. There are some very sobering reports out of Germany. And I think all of that has really given this meeting a real gravity, particularly as they all gather in one place, the very place that was subject to those drones.
How are EU leaders interpreting these airspace incursions? They seem to be, solidly blaming them on Russia. But do they have an idea of why, what the aim is?
Well, we've got to distinguish here two things. There are the overt airspace violations that undoubtedly occurred. That's in Poland on September 9th, I want to say. And then the Russian jets inside Estonian airspace on September 19th, 10 days after that. And those really were very, very clear, overt violations. There's no doubt about it. The drone sightings that we see over Denmark, Germany, and other places are much murkier. We don't exactly know who was responsible. We don't know where the drones came from, though in recent days there has been interest in Russian ships that have been in the Baltic Sea from where the drones may have been launched. Now, these incidents, some of them may have been accidental. European leaders are not categorical in all cases that these were deliberate. But what they broadly see is a pattern in which Russia is willing to run risks to intimidate Europe. And I would say that whilst that has happened in some ways for 3 years since the war in Ukraine, if not before that, this is a little bit different because this is happening at a time when the relationship between the United States and Europe is more distant and more difficult than it has been. And so the purpose of these incursions may be not just to intimidate Europe into backing down in the provision of weapons to Ukraine, which is what a lot of this Russian activity has been about since 2022. This may also be about trying to accentuate and widen some of those gaps inside NATO, inside the European Union, not just between America and Europe, but also within Europe itself.
Interesting. So at today's meeting, was there a shared sense of the way forward here?
I think you see a combined collective sense of threat in Europe, an agreement that the threat is serious, that the moment is serious. However, that doesn't necessarily translate into clarity over the response. For instance, if Russia were to invade airspace again with jets, would they be shot down? Or if they were not an immediate threat, would you let them pass through? I think some of those kinds of questions are still being debated. And of course, it's difficult to answer them with any great certainty if you don't know exactly what the United States would do in response.
As this has been happening, as drones were swarming parts of Eastern Europe, the Pentagon was gathering top brass in Quantico, Virginia, to call for the use of U.S. military against, quote, the enemy within. I have to ask, has there been much reaction to that today in European defense circles, especially as all these folks are meeting?
There has. Hegseth's comments, which were principally about standards, fitness standards, grooming, beards, fat generals, I think those are viewed with some bemusement, but not necessarily grave concern. However, I think that it was the president's comments on the use of the American military inside the United States, the idea that American cities ought to be testing grounds, that have prompted really much more serious concern in Europe. And to put this in a broader context, we here in Europe, particularly those of us who watch foreign and defense policy, we are watching very closely for what will be said in something called the National Defense Strategy, the NDS. That has been drafted by the Trump administration. It is circulating internally, and the early reports suggest not just that it will deprioritize Europe, and that is, I think, everyone understands that that's understandable at this time in America. Europe is not as vital as it was. The concerning thing is that it seems it will not even prioritize China and the Pacific, but instead it will prioritize the Western Hemisphere, the homeland, the southern border, counter-narcotics. And I think if that's what it looks like, and if we see Trump's comments in that light, that will give rise to serious concern that the United States is simply turning away from not just its alliances in Europe, but perhaps from its alliances much more broadly as well.
There's another quote from Secretary Hegseth that I did want to get your thoughts on or see if folks in Europe are talking about. He said that going forward, and I'm quoting here, "We don't fight with stupid rules of engagement. We untie the hands of our war fighters to intimidate, demoralize, hunt, and kill the enemies of our country. No more politically correct and overbearing rules of engagement." That seems to me like strong language. Is that something that's getting a reaction?
He's effectively implied the Geneva Conventions are obsolete. I think that has sparked serious concern, actually even inside America's armed forces, but also in Europe, because if you are fighting alongside US troops, in the same way that the war on terror caused grave concern when the CIA engaged in torture for information, that caused tension with European allies who wanted adherence to rules, adherence to human rights. If that same story plays out in the military domain, and you have US units who are no longer committed in the same way to the International Humanitarian Law, as it's called, IHL, I think that will complicate and strain these relationships with US allies, particularly inside NATO, where, remember, our armed forces are led by a 4-star American general. They are led by other American commanders who head up Allied Land Command, who head up Allied Air Command, and many, many other senior positions on the European continent, which would be vital in a war in Europe. And so those kinds of splits, those kinds of attitudes, I think that will cause real concern in Europe.
Since January, we've heard worries about the strength of the transatlantic relationship. Is this yet another inflection point?
Well, in a way, I think we all accept here that this is never settled. You will never win President Trump's acceptance for Article 5, the Mutual Defense Clause of NATO. This will always be a continuous negotiation. Every crisis, every moment of tension will always have with it a fraught sense of uncertainty over how far Donald Trump will back his European allies. And so as Russia pushes, as Russia conducts these airspace violations, as it conducts these provocations, every time that Donald Trump says, "I'm not that interested in getting involved. This is a European problem. Maybe it was an accident." Every time that happens, I think that provokes another sense of anxiety in Europe over the ultimate question, which is if a war broke out in Europe and Russia were to attack an ally, would Donald Trump really show up? And nobody knows the answer, but I think the level of uncertainty around that remains stubbornly high, and it will probably never go down again.
Shashank Joshi is the defense editor at The Economist, speaking to us today from the UK.
The global shift away from cash has mostly been gradual, but in Brazil, it's been turbocharged. That's because of a new payment system that's become nearly universal there. It's called Pix, and the U.S. is now seeing it as a threat to its own credit card industry. The World's Tibisai Zea brings us a story from Sao Paulo, Brazil.
On São Paulo's main avenue, the Avenida Paulista, even the coconut water pushcart displays a big sign with a QR code.
Aceita Pix aí? Então dá duas para mim.
A customer lifts his phone, scans, and within seconds, the payment arrives in the vendor's account.
So I'm paying to João Vitor da Silva. New pagamentos.
He's using Pix, a system launched in 2020 by Brazil's central bank. In just 5 years, Pix has woven itself into daily life. It's more practical, says Patricia Souza. She only needs her phone, and she says Pix is accepted everywhere. People use it to pay street vendors, to give money to homeless people, and to buy big appliances in stores.
Então o cliente escolhe se ele quer pagar no Pix com desconto diferenciado.
In this department store, shoppers get about a 10% discount if they pay with Pix. And that's because businesses avoid the fees they would normally pay to card companies. So what exactly is Pix? Think of it as an instant payment like Venmo or Zelle, but with two big differences. Pix is built and operated by Brazil's central bank, not private banks. And from the start, the central bank forced a large number of financial institutions to use it.
It was mandatory for all institutions above a certain size to adopt Pix, to be part of Pix. So it was possible to send money virtually to everywhere.
That made Pix accessible to a lot of customers from day one, says Lauro Gonzalez. He studies financial inclusion at the Getúlio Vargas Foundation in São Paulo. There have been concerns about privacy, but many Brazilians say they trust more their central bank than private banks. Today, about 90% of Brazilian adults use Pix. That's over 100 million people. And unlike credit cards, which are mostly used by the middle class and the wealthy, Pix has been embraced most strongly by low-income Brazilians.
The lower-income population doesn't have access to all this credit cards, different tools available.
So they adopted Pix more quickly, also because high fees once discouraged low-income people from digital transfers. Pix eliminated that barrier and enabled free transfers across all banks and fintechs. Now, Pix's success has created friction with Washington, where officials accuse Pix of unfair competition. Mateo Sampaio is a Brazilian professor of finance at Florida State University.
In some way, if Pix is this government technology and the central bank is forcing, for example, banks to use them, there is an argument that it is unfair.
But what he found is that both banks and credit card companies are benefiting from the changes that Pix triggered.
And those changes are people stop using cash in a cash society, and banks have benefited a lot from deposits increasing, from number of accounts increasing, and we tie those improvements to Pix.
As millions of Brazilians began using Pix, they also opened accounts, started holding deposits, and became eligible for credit. So then why are U.S. officials pushing so hard against Pix?
They totally depart from economic and financial justifications, in my opinion. They're totally related to an ideological and political stance.
Lauro Gonzalez says this is part of President Trump's trade war against Brazil for sentencing his far-right ally, Jair Bolsonaro. But relations may be improving slightly. At the UN General Assembly last week, Trump and Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva had a friendly handshake and promised to meet. Trump later described Lula as a very nice man with excellent chemistry. But it's not clear if warmer ties will be enough to end U.S. investigations into Pix. For The World, I'm Tibisay Sea, São Paulo, Brazil.
Coming up, the Pope had something to say about climate change, and Arnold Schwarzenegger is listening. You're listening to The World. This is The World. I'm Marco Werman. At Castel Gandolfo near Rome, Pope Leo XIV has just delivered his most extensive comments yet on the environment. He spoke at a 3-day conference on climate justice. The World's Matthew Bell reports.
10 years ago, Pope Francis issued Laudato Si', his Catholic teaching on protecting the environment. This week's conference outside of Rome is about renewing that commitment. One of the speakers was the Austrian-born former Republican governor of California and star of the Terminator movies Arnold Schwarzenegger, who said it's an honor to be on stage with an action hero like Pope Leo.
Now you're laughing because he doesn't look maybe like one, like you see in the movies with the muscles and with the guns and all that stuff. No. But the reason why I call him an action hero is because as soon as he became the Pope, he ordered the Vatican to put solar panels on top of the buildings. Think about that.
Schwarzenegger said his vision is about working together to terminate the air and water pollution that's killing millions of people every year, and that's according to the World Health Organization. Picking up on that theme, Pope Leo thanked the previous speakers.
But I would like to add that if there is indeed an action hero with us this afternoon, it's all of you who are working together to make a difference.
Leo expressed gratitude for his predecessors' teachings about caring for the environment, or, as they both call it, our common home.
Pope Francis's concerns and recommendations have been appreciated and accepted not only by Catholics, but also by many people outside the Church who feel understood, represented, and supported during this specific moment in our history.
As Francis did before him, Leo connected protection of the environment with the Catholic principle of caring for the poor and the marginalized. He said the challenges outlined by Pope Francis a decade ago are even more relevant today.
What must be done now to ensure that caring for our common home and listening to the cry of the earth and the poor do not appear as mere passing trends, or worse still, that they be seen and felt as divisive issues.
Pope Leo said these Christian priorities call for a spiritual conversion in people's hearts. But he also repeated something else Francis talked about, that the most effective solutions to environmental degradation need to come in the form of major political decisions on the national and international levels. For The World, I'm Matthew Bell.
In London in the 1960s, there was a covert police operation to infiltrate the Black Power movement and bring down its leaders. It was orchestrated by Scotland Yard, which called the effort the Black Power Desk. That is also the name of a new musical about the whole ordeal. The World's Europe correspondent Orla Berry set out to learn more.
If you've never heard of the Black Power Desk, the undercover British policing operation, don't feel too bad. Many people in Britain haven't heard of it either.
It's quite hush-hush. I don't think many people know about it.
This is theatre maker Gail Babb. She's been working on Black Power Desk, the musical, for the past 5 years. The show, written by Uriel Klein McCongo, is set in London in the early 1970s, just as the British Black Power movement really came into its own, with protests like this one opposing racial inequality in Notting Hill. One of the leaders of the British movement was Althea Jones-LeConte.
We've complained to the police about the police and nothing's been done. We've complained to magistrates about magistrates and nothing's been done. We've complained to judges about judges and nothing's been done. Now it's time to do something ourselves.
That was Jones-LeConte speaking in a documentary in 1973. The new musical aims to highlight the work of black female activists and also show the toll that activism can take. The story is told through the eyes of two sisters, as one becomes increasingly involved in the movement.
I don't know you, don't know you, don't know you anymore. I don't know you.
Black Power Desk, the covert police operation that inspired the musical, was set up under the order of the Labour government in the UK in 1967.
Well, you got to remember at the time you have Black Power in America, the Black Panther Party were founded in 1966. You have protests on the streets in America. You have people like Malcolm X who've been assassinated in 1965. You have lots of movements in the States.
Kayinde Andrews led the establishment of the first Black Studies degree programme in Europe at Birmingham City University.
So there was a fear of rebellion, fear of riots, fear of protest, fear that the American problem would come to the UK. Hence why the state was really quite dismayed and set up this special branch desk to surveil the activists.
Even today, Andrews says the police operation remains shrouded in secrecy. The UK's Official Secrets Act has kept full details from being released. It's understood the special branch operation continued up until the mid-90s, although Andrews believes its work may not have been entirely discontinued.
The idea of the police surveilling black organisations, black activists, certainly I would suspect carried on. The Black Power Desk itself may have gone, but I would be very surprised if the police are not surveilling the actions of black activists even up to today.
In a statement, a spokesperson for the Metropolitan Police told me they couldn't source any information on the Black Power Desk because it existed too long ago. Theatre maker Gail Babb says the story of Britain's Black Power movement itself is also still largely untold. Most people can reel off names like Rosa Parks or Martin Luther King from the US struggle, she says, but not the names of key British black activists. And she says there's a reason for that.
It's easier to look at the slave trade, for example, as an American thing rather than as a British thing, which it absolutely, of course, was. It's easier for Britain to digest that fight because it's not on our shores. If we talk about the fight that's happening on this island here, then we also have to talk about the injustices that were and are present on this island here.
Babb says she hopes Black Power Desk the musical will inspire audiences to dig deeper into British black history and find out more about the various movements and its leaders. And she says, history lesson aside, the show is also a fun night out.
The music is really brilliant. The audiences are singing along to by the time you get to the second chorus. But then also, they're shouting all the way through. They're telling characters what they should and shouldn't do. You got some of the elders in the audience telling our characters off when they need to hear some tough love. So it's been really beautiful.
The musical is currently showing at London's Brixton House Theatre before moving on to Coventry, Birmingham and Manchester. And Babb says, for any US producers who might be listening, they'd be more than happy to bring the show stateside. For The World, I'm Orla Barry.
Get your tickets now if you can. They went on sale today for next summer's Men's World Cup soccer tournament. Matches will be played in Mexico, Canada, and in the U.S. The chance at first dibs on tickets was decided with a lottery system run by FIFA, soccer's global governing body. Cheap seats start at $60, and tickets to the finals are closer to $7,000. Add in the new dynamic pricing system, and those ticket values could rise even higher. We'll have more on the 2026 World Cup tomorrow on the show.
I'm Tinku Ray, Executive Editor at The World. The government's decision to eliminate federal funding for public media is a devastating blow to communities nationwide. The World is also affected by this defunding. Since our launch in 1996, The World has been an integral part of the public media system, airing on nearly 370 public radio stations across the US and Canada, taking you to places you may never have heard of and bringing you the stories that connect us on this planet. Without federal support, local stations, especially in rural and underserved areas, face deep cuts or even closure. Vital public service alerts, news, storytelling, and programming like The World will be impacted. The World has weathered many storms, and we remain steadfast in our commitment to being your trusted source for human-centered international news, shared with integrity and care. We believe public media is about truth and access for all. As an independent, non-profit newsroom, we aren't controlled by billionaire owners or corporations. We are sustained by listeners like you. Now, more than ever, we need your help to support our global reporting work and power the future of the world. Please visit theworld.org/give to learn more and to make your donation now. That's theworld.org/give. On behalf of the entire team here at The World, thank you. You make our work possible.
This is The World. I'm Marco Werman.
And I'm Carolyn Beeler. There are aspects of climate change that you can already feel. Maybe you especially notice the hotter summers or less snow in the winter. There is one change coming, though, that we can't yet feel, but it may have huge impacts on life as we know it.
Global warming is expected to change something called the AMOC. It's a system of ocean currents that controls much of the world's weather.
These currents form a kind of vertical circuit stretching the length of the Atlantic. They move warm water from around the equator northward, where it then gives up its heat to the atmosphere around Europe.
So it's the reason you can live in London quite easily. But if you look at the same latitude on the eastern side of Canada, it is quite cold.
This is oceanographer Nicholas Focal explaining the AMOC to an audience at the University of Georgia, where he works.
And so this is a redistribution of heat in our climate system. Our global society has essentially evolved around this system being in place.
Scientists expect global warming to slow the AMOC down. Some fear it might collapse entirely. If that happened, Western Europe would get a lot colder in the winter. One estimate is that parts of Norway could be 60 degrees colder in the winter. It would also raise sea levels on the U.S. East Coast and move the tropical rain belt north.
You can cause places that were desert to be very, very wet very quickly. And that causes landslides, that causes mosquito-borne illnesses, that causes a lot of other things. And it also depletes the rainfall over the rainforest.
There's a debate right now over whether the AMOC might hit a tipping point sometime soon where total collapse becomes inevitable. Stefan Ramsdorf from the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research is the most vocal scientist who believes that.
The billion-dollar question is, how close are we to this tipping point, and will we maybe push it over the edge already in the next few decades?
That is Ramsdorf giving a presentation to Arctic leaders last fall.
Recent studies have really given certainly me the impression that this risk is much greater than we thought just 5 years ago.
The AMOC, which, by the way, is an acronym, it stands for Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation. It is expected to change because of two things triggered by climate change: warming sea surface temperatures and melting in the Arctic.
There is one place, though, that's something of a wild card: Greenland, specifically the Greenland ice sheet, which covers most of the giant island and is more than a mile thick. It's melting, and that could be catastrophic for this key ocean current.
The thing is, there is a lot of uncertainty about that, and that's because most of the AMOC projections we hear about are based on computer modeling. Scientists have only been directly measuring the ocean current itself for about 20 years. I spoke with scientist Aurora Rath about this. She's a PhD student at the University of San Diego.
And so actually looking at how the AMOC is responding to glacial melt that's happening now is still a really open question, and there's a lot of uncertainty around it. And what is happening here in this location is a part of trying to be more certain about that question.
Carolyn, you spent time speaking with the scientists and others in Greenland, so let's have you take the reporting from here.
We were on a 200-foot scientific research vessel sailing from the coast of southeast Greenland into Surmalake Fjord, essentially an inlet carved by glaciers and flanked by jagged mountains. There were about 15 scientists on board, and I hopped on when they started sailing into this fjord toward the Greenland ice sheet itself. All right, this is beautiful.
Great.
All right, so camera will be in this hand. When we got close to the end of the fjord, bright polar sun was bouncing off the iceberg surrounding us, and I was juggling a recorder and a camera to try to capture it all.
You can see the tall mountains on both sides, and these glacial fjords were carved during ice ages when the glaciers expanded.
Harvard oceanographer Fiamma Strano is the lead scientist on the ship and has been studying this fjord since 2008.
Picture this all filled with ice. And then in warmer periods, like we are now, the glaciers retreat.
Stranio and I are standing at the bow of the ship facing a glacier in the distance they call Midgard. It looks like a river of ice flowing down from the Greenland ice sheet into the water in front of us, ending in a wall of white. This ice that we are staring at is key to the future of the AMOC. If all of the Greenland ice sheet melts, it's safe to say that would wreak havoc on global weather systems. Is that fair?
Yes, and we don't expect the entire ice sheet to melt, but even just melting a fraction of the ice sheet and putting all of the fresh water into the ocean quickly has the ability to really affect the ocean circulation.
Here's why. The AMOC is driven by warmer surface waters near the equator moving northward. Now, as they cool, they sink to the bottom of the ocean, are carried back toward the equator, and eventually rise again.
The AMOC, this overturning circulation, is very sensitive to fresh water. So if the ocean is salty, fresh water, it's very light, it sits at the top of the ocean, and it can inhibit or completely stop this process of mixing that is part of the overturning circulation.
Greenland's ice, it is fresh water, so if it all melted and slid onto the surface of the ocean fast, it's game over for the AMOC. But it's not that simple. The meltwater doesn't just get sprayed out on top of the ocean.
It's not as simple as turning a hose on. If you can see it in the background.
She gestures to the glaciers.
Some of them are deep, thousands of feet below sea level.
Some of the meltwater actually comes out down at near the bottom of the glacier. It gets mixed in the fjord with meltwater from the top of the glacier and from icebergs.
These rivers of fresh water into the North Atlantic, if we want to understand where they're going, how quickly, at what depths, we need to measure the processes in the fjords.
This is seen as key to predicting the future of the AMOC, and it's what scientists are doing on this ship, measuring this meltwater to understand better where it is and where it's headed.
And there it goes.
PhD student Aurora Roth leans over a railing on the ship deck as she watches a large metal cage filled with water-collecting canisters get lowered into the fjord.
And the water's so clear that you can see it like 10 meters down.
Sensors on this instrument measure the temperature of the water and how salty it is at different depths.
And I kind of think about it as like spying on the ocean or eavesdropping on the ocean.
After several minutes, the instrument is pulled up out of the water, and Roth plugs a cable into a laptop to download the data.
This is the best part.
This is when the ocean spills its secrets.
Yes, exactly. This is the tea from the ocean.
On a line graph, she points to a layer of cold water about 300 feet down. It is hard to say exactly where it's coming from, Roth says.
But it definitely has glacial influence. It would not be that cold without the influence of glaciers and glacial meltwater and of icebergs melting as well.
Now, this data and 18 years of data gathered by generations of Stranio students show that meltwater from Greenland's glaciers is making its way out of this fjord and into the North Atlantic. To understand how it and other forces are affecting the AMOC, scientists have sunk sensors farther out in the ocean that record data 24/7. Some of these sensors, called moorings, stretch from the Bahamas to Western Africa. The ones Stranio works on are deployed off southern Greenland, stretching to Canada in one direction and Scotland in the other.
We've been measuring the flow of warm water poleward and the return flow towards the equator, so southward, for over 10 years. And so what we can do is we can link the measurements here to the AMOC measurements.
As she and I talk, Stranio and her team are recovering a mooring they deployed here 2 years ago.
5-3.
5-3.
3-3.
3-3.
1-0.
1-1-0.
She stands at the edge of the deck in a hard hat and life vest, working with Harvard researcher Margaret Lindman to send the mooring a signal to come to the surface.
Jakob, we are going to release the mooring.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes. Good luck.
So now we go up to the bridge to look for it. Scientists, the crew, everyone heads to an upper deck peering out to starboard to try to spot 3 buoys that will float the sensor to the surface.
Roger that. We spotted it. Yay! All right, Tunis, you get the chocolate. Good job.
Tunis, where is it?
Over there. The little ice, you can see.
In front of this little iceberg in front of it. The crew fishes the mooring out of the sea. The scientists scrub off 2 years of accumulated muck. And then 4 scientists and 1 reporter huddle around a computer to watch the data transfer.
1 minute to download 2 years worth of data. It's 525,600 minutes times 2. So about 1 million data points.
Do you just know that from Rent?
I know that from Rent. Yeah. We could start singing, but we won't.
This is Roth and Lindman. They seem excited and nervous. There is no way to be certain that the sensor has been gathering data properly until they see what is on this laptop screen.
Very exciting. It looks like a full record, which means 2 more years.
So is a success.
Success.
Yay. Success here means 1 more hard-fought data point to add to an 18-year record Stranio has been collecting about what Greenland's melting glaciers are doing to this fjord and what that might mean for the AMOC.
To understand this link, make predictions, give information that communities can use to adapt and prepare is really key. And at the same time, a reminder that we need to reduce fossil fuel emissions if we don't want our planet to absorb even more heat.
Painstaking research by Fiamma Stranio to understand the key question of whether the AMOC, the ocean current that has such a huge impact on global weather systems, is slowing down or even at risk of collapsing. So, Carolyn, given these years of research, how does Stranio assess the risk of collapse? Like, what did she say?
Basically, she says, we don't know yet, but the research she and others are doing is getting us closer toward having an answer. So not the most satisfying answer there, but this is how science works.
And how does the research she's doing on the ocean connect to the climate models you mentioned earlier?
So the data that she is gathering and others like her are gathering will eventually be used to improve those models. So right now they have a very simplistic view of melting in Greenland. But with new data, eventually, hopefully, they'll be able to account for where meltwater from the Greenland ice sheet actually goes, at what depths, and what impact it might have on the AMOC. And eventually its future stability, which is the big question here.
So, Carolyn, having done this reporting now, what's your perspective on the scientists on the 2 sides of this debate? Like Stranio, who says we just don't know yet what's going to happen, and Rahmsdorf, who's trying to raise the alarm about us being close to a tipping point.
I mean, on both sides, the kind of bottom line action is the same. They will both say that we need to have better models to get a better sense of when changes might be coming so that communities can prepare, as Stranio said at the end of my story. And also, we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions because what is causing or what will cause, depending on the scientists you ask, these changes to the AMOC is global warming, is greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So the bottom line is the more and faster we reduce those, the greater chance we have for a stable AMOC.
That's the world's Carolyn Beeler, and we'll hear more from you tomorrow.
That's right, Marco. I will have a story about how people living in Greenland are already being impacted by climate change. So tune in for that.
People in Afghanistan are reporting their internet service is partially restored today. The Taliban had blocked online access in the country to prevent immoral behavior, it said. The move disrupted all kinds of everyday needs, and for people already struggling under the Taliban's severe restrictions, losing the internet meant losing a lifeline. The world's Shirin Jafari reports.
Mohammad Yassin stares helplessly at his phone, hoping that by some miracle he hears from his wife and toddler. Yassin is sitting in the waiting area at the border crossing between Iran and Afghanistan. He says he was deported a few months ago from Iran and now is waiting for his family to join him. The last time he was able to reach them, he says, they'd started the journey to the border, but he doesn't know where they are because he's been cut off from all forms of communication. The Taliban started imposing bans in several provinces across Afghanistan last month. This week, the restrictions reached Kabul, the capital. Moshref owns a small business in Kabul and tells the local television there that he hasn't been able to process payments because of the shutdown. Flights in and out of the country have been grounded. Healthcare and banking systems have been affected too. Outside the country, people are desperate to reach their loved ones. Sia, who lives in the UK, says she doesn't understand why the Taliban are taking away even the smallest joy from Afghans. Also in the UK, Sara Wahidi has been trying to reach her 30 employees inside Afghanistan. She's the CEO of Sivam, a tech startup. She says over the past 4 years, she has moved most of her operations online, but the recent news shows that's not a reliable plan.
UN agencies and countries all across the world have said, move to online services, we'll support you. And the silence has been deafening because there is no plan B.
The internet shutdown has been the most devastating for Afghan women. Since the ultra-conservative government took power in 2021, it has imposed numerous restrictions on women. That includes access to higher education and employment. Wahidi says online education was their last line of hope.
Women and girls have done every single thing they can to continue their studies. They are using every form of online access to education, and this is one of the most disastrous updates that I've seen out of Afghanistan.
Wahida Amiri fled Afghanistan for her safety and now lives in California. She's a women's rights activist and spent 18 days in Taliban prison in 2022 for protesting against the restrictions. She says cutting Afghans from the internet means many won't be able to receive remittances from their relatives outside. Millions of people rely on remittances to feed their families, she says. According to the United Nations, Afghanistan's economy basically collapsed since the Taliban takeover in 2021. Amiri says she hasn't been able to reach her own family. It's terrifying, she says. The country has gone dark. Sadiqa Zaki is a researcher with the International Food Policy Research Institute in Washington. She says these past few days remind her of the time that her family emigrated to a European country and were offline for several days.
Again, after 15 years, I'm experiencing the same.
She says it's like her family has turned into online ghosts. One moment they appear, and the next they're gone. She worries how these disruptions will impact women like her 23-year-old cousin, who was hoping to complete her computer science degree remotely.
A while ago, my cousin was telling me that without this online education, I don't have any inspiration to leave.
Zaki and activists worry that this is the beginning of more internet shutdowns to come that would be detrimental to the livelihood and well-being of Afghans, particularly women, they say.
They were imprisoned in houses, but they still had a means to connect with outside world. And now they lost that last resort.
The Taliban didn't respond to my questions about why it shut down the internet or whether this is part of a new policy. For The World, I'm Shirin Jafari.
This is The World. I'm Marco Werman. Etosha National Park in Namibia is one of the biggest nature reserves in all of Africa. It's home to a salt desert so vast it can be seen from space. But the park also has hundreds of thousands of acres of savanna and shrubland and some of Africa's most charismatic creatures.
Elephants and rhinos and the predators and the whole range of giraffe, kudu, oryx, springbok.
Pauline Lindeque with World Wildlife Fund Namibia says Namibians are proud of Etosha Park, and with 200,000 tourists visiting the reserve each year,
it also has positive spin-offs from people's livelihoods. The tourism industry, not only from Etosha, but in the other areas, benefit from the draw card of Etosha National Park.
That's in good times, and the past week has been anything but in Etosha, as wildfires tore through more than a third of the park, quickly burning out of control. Pauline Lindeque told me the fire was due to multiple factors, including years of drought and, ironically, a recent heavy rainy season.
So from the drought years, there would have been accumulation of woody matter that has dried out a lot. And then from the good rainy season, there was a lot of grass in the area. And so that really created a lot of biomass that can burn. And then to top it off, the last week or 10 days, there were quite strong winds. And then combined with a strong fire and then winds that are blowing the fire, leapfrogging the fire into other areas means that areas like fire breaks and roads that would have normally been used to contain the fire were just not effective.
So I mentioned the animals in the park, some of the big five like elephants, lions, and rhinos. What do we know about how those large mammals are faring right now?
Well, we haven't really received exact information on that. Park management staff and veterinarians have started to fly the area to really assess the extent of the damage or to find any injured animals that they will, of course, then treat if possible, or humanely euthanize if they're too injured. We do know that some of the wildlife, of course, has moved away, escaped the fire. I got a report of a pride of lions that actually moved out of the park and was seen in one of the surrounding areas very safely.
So the fire has been brought under control except for lingering flames outside the park. What resources, though, were corralled to put it out?
The fire is fought with a lot of manpower on the ground. Manpower, vehicles. There will have been water used from vehicles pumped out. Backburning is often done during, let's say, the nighttime hours or the appropriate time when the wind direction may change a bit and you're trying to create a barrier or trying to contain and put out fires along the front. And now that that danger is over, of course, the post-fire work starts.
How fast can recovery happen? What does history show us?
Generally, recovery will happen quite quickly once the rains start. In the past, really, after a year or two of decent rains, you won't actually see the evidence of the fire. You may see some trees with charred areas on their bark, but that are alive.
That's good to hear, although as hard as it is to consider, this probably will not be the last fire in the region. In your opinion, what needs to happen before the next one in terms of preparedness to keep the devastation we're seeing right now from repeating?
Yes, as I said, I mean, this was a particularly bad combination of circumstances, and it's difficult now to really say we cannot stop or avoid this from happening. We can just put maybe strategies in place. And as I say, now probably a lot of the biomass has burned. This may not be a threat for some years to come, but it's certainly something that we should learn from.
Namibia, like many countries, is facing the impacts of climate change. How is that affecting the park and your understanding of its environment?
I think firstly, we need to just remember that Namibia is an arid country. And so already, I think Namibia and Namibians are used to having very unpredictable rainfall and these drought periods. And that happens on a cycle of about 10 years and continues to do so. So to some extent, I think there is already some resilience in Namibia to the potential impacts of climate change, but definitely the projections are that rainfall will become more erratic and unpredictable, and that there's a possibility of intensifying drought conditions. So we certainly are looking to ensure that people are able to operate within these potentially worse conditions, to build up some resilience to it. But it's in the context of already quite a difficult situation because of these wet and dry cycles in Namibia.
Pauline Lindeque in Windhoek is Director of Wildlife and Landscape for World Wildlife Fund Namibia. She's been describing the impact of a massive wildfire this week at Etosha National Park.
You cannot get through a single day without having an impact on the world around you. What you do makes a difference. Those are the famous words of Jane Goodall, who became a household name for her research on chimpanzees in the 1960s. Goodall has died at the age of 91.
True to her philosophy, in her lifetime she transformed our understanding of the natural world and the animals within it. Goodall lived among the chimps in Tanzania. She learned that they had distinct personalities, emotions, and relationships, and used tools, just as humans do.
In her later years, Goodall was an environmental advocate. In 2023, she told GBH in Boston that individual action matters.
Do what you can do. You will find you make a difference. And then when you make a difference, you understand that all around the world there are people just like you making a difference.
And in the face of climate change, young people gave her hope.
I think that if you have not been forced into thinking in a reductionist way, and you have an open mind, there's still a lot of scope for young people to change the way we think.
Jane Goodall is sad passing, but she leaves a legacy of optimism. The World is produced by GBH and PRX, broadcasting weekdays from the Nan and Bill Harris studio in Boston and from the Department of Communication at UC San Diego. You can find us online anytime at theworld.org and find our original reporting on YouTube. You can subscribe to our new channel there. I'm Marco Werman.
And I'm Carolyn Beeler. Join us back here tomorrow.
The World is supported by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. macfound.org. By the Lumina Foundation, committed to a fair, universal system for learning beyond high school that offers every American the chance for a better life. luminafoundation.org. By the Ford Foundation. By the Henry Luce Foundation. By the PRX Ambassador Council, whose members include Bill Resnick, Ron Cuniff, Diet and Paul Meserve, Patrice F. and Cameron J., Merle Kurtzrock, and George Zimmerman. The World's theme music is composed by Ned Porter. The World is a co-production of GBH Boston and PRX.